Welcome back to the Rocky Road Podcast, my friends. We have a new friend here today with us, and her name is Hannah. Hannah, how are you? Let's introduce yourself.
I'm doing well, and thank you for not accidentally butchering my last name. My last name is Spanke, and most of the time people will say Spank, but yeah, Hannah Spanke. I'm super excited to have this conversation. I am currently living in Kentucky, but I'm moving back to California where I'm from, and I'm so excited about that. And what I do for work is I'm a somatic attachment therapist. I am a licensed authentic tantra practitioner. That's like a bulk of what I do with my clients is tantra focused. And I'm a clinical sexologist as well. And so my background, which I know we're going to talk about more in depth, but I had a rather taboo background, almost a decade in the sex industry. And then my own personal journey of like healing my way out of that industry. And then all the education along the way that I stumbled into led me into what I do now, which is really just passionately helping people heal themselves from the inside out. And a major focus is on the body and sex included, and just really unlocking the wisdom that we all have in our bodies so that you can be an aligned, happy human being.
Mm-hmm. I am so intrigued at the work you do just because we're both counselors, we're music therapists, but we very, very, very rarely talk about sex in our sessions. I mean, I work with a lot of kids. It would be inappropriate. So I'm just curious on how it's hard to build rapport with people, and it's hard to really make people feel comfortable, especially about the most intimate parts about themselves, and more especially if there's an issue happening in the relationship where sex is the core issue. And so how do you help people feel comfortable in that setting?
Yeah. So on one hand, not every single person I ever work with or talk to does know my backstory, but I think even if they know a tiny, tiny bit of it, that is kind of like, it's the icebreaker in itself. They think, oh, this was her past. This is what she did before. And so it's like whatever they're going to bring to the table is, they feel like it's in safe hands to start with because it's like been there, done that kind of a thing. So it just kind of takes the edge off.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I've just kind of always had that effect on people. I would say, like, I remember in high school just wearing like outrageous things, like bright colored eyeshadow and like just things that people would respond to me and all the time be like, oh, I wish I could do that. I wish I could do that. And I was always so confused by that response from people. And then now I see it as a gift. You know, it works to my advantage where people are like, because of my boldness, I guess, in different areas, they trust that there's not going to be any judgment coming towards them, I think. And so, yeah, there's no like buttoned up kind of thing they have to go through. So it just makes it easier. Like I am the lube to the conversation, I guess.
There you go. And then adding little things like that adds the laughter, which then
Right.
makes people feel comfortable. I love the word bold. I think that's, if I had to describe you, just the little that I know about you, it does seem like you're very bold. And I think that's so important in the work that you do. So you mentioned a little bit of your story leading up to the finding your passion and helping other people. So we can start on day one, or we can start on kind of how you got to work in the sex industry, and to your comfort level, what that looked like, and then what got you out of it. So I'm going to
Yeah.
give you the floor.
Okay, cool. So I actually started, the very first experience I ever had in the sex industry was at 16. So I was really, really young. And it was a very split experience. My motivation at the time was so that I could get enough money to pay for my end of the year, like Disneyland graduation school trip. I was about a month away from graduating high school. I graduated very early, and it was like a month after my 16th birthday. So I did this thing, and then I had like devil angel on the shoulder kind of thing. On one hand, it was like, did I just figure something out? Like I have money that I did not have 30 minutes ago. Like, how did this happen? Like, this doesn't make sense for the amount of effort that's put in, you know, like how did, like, wow, I unlocked a secret. But on the more dominant side, that I didn't have the capacity to really like feel or look at or name in any way until years later, I was so riddled with anxiety in my body. Like I was so tense feeling, I was having cold sweats in the middle of the night, not being able to fall asleep, nightmares, like seeing this man's face flash in my mind, things like that. And so there was very much like a PTSD kind of thing going on that I didn't have any. I mean, I knew that it was happening and I knew that it was related to that experience, but I didn't have any real awareness about why that was happening or like any depth to it. And then fast forward years later, a year later, I was 17, right before 18. I had a fake ID and I started working as like a house stripper kind of a thing where they do like bachelor parties and that sort of deal. Because in California, at least, you don't need or didn't need a social security card to work for a company like that. So I
Mm.
could use my fake ID. Did that. Um, More like accumulated trauma that I didn't know was trauma at the time. And it was leading me into becoming more and more and more dissociated on purpose. Like I was drinking more, I started smoking weed more, and that just continued to escalate for really the whole time that I was in the industry. At 19, I started working at an actual club because I was legally able to at that point. I was there for about 3 years, and then halfway through that, I started to see clients privately outside of the club setting. And so then it was this, at the time I was justifying it and using that kind of language. Like I was seeing them outside,
Mhm.
but the black and white, like it was prostitution, you know? And
Mm.
so it took me a little bit to get on board with what I was actually doing. So again, just more mind body, like incongruence,
Yeah.
dissociation. And at the end of my strip club days, I was working less and less and less. Like once a month, I would go in just to keep my schedule, like just to keep my contract. And the environment really started to wear on me because it's a very hard environment. It's a rough environment on every level. The girls you work with, the employees there, the customers, all of it. And so I finally left, and then it just transitioned into like full time escorting prostitution, basically with private clients that I either met through the strip club or through an online website for like meeting sugar daddies type of
Mhm.
situate type of arrangements, you know. And I did that for years until I didn't. There was always this undertone of like conflict in my personal life because I was still having very serious, long term, committed, monogamous romantic relationships in my
Mm.
private life, but like justifying what I was doing in my work life was really 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 hard to do for myself alone, but to a man that obviously was like signing up for a monogamous relationship, wanted me to be his only partner and him to be mine. And then that wasn't the case, and I was saying, but it's not the same, I'm getting paid for it. And so there was just a lot of disconnect that led to a lot of conflict over the years. And in the grand scheme of things, like one of the massive takeaways I had from all that time is that that's what I was a match for at the time. I was a match for men who would commit to me, but on some level, most of the time openly, were disapproving of me in some regard because on the deepest level, I was disapproving of me, you know, and
Mm.
how I was making decisions. And so there was a time, and this was really like a massive breaking point for me. I had already really been scrambling in my mind of like wanting to get out of the industry, but not knowing how. And it really is like an addiction sort of a thing with the money, the validation. And that's just like with other addictions like drugs or alcohol. People will say, oh, it's not a problem. And then eventually, okay, maybe it's a problem, but I wouldn't do anything bad. And then the next thing you know, they're like stealing money from their grandma's house or something. You know what I
Mm.
mean? For me,
Mhm.
it was the same kind of trajectory with the stripping and then eventually doing more. Because when I started, I thought I was like the most angelic stripper in the world. Like there wasn't a single part of me that was gonna sell myself. I would never.
Mhm.
But that's what I was already doing, you know, being in that environment. Just didn't want to see it that way. And then the money, the
Mhm.
validation, the money, the validation, it started to have me become more and more flimsy and porous with my own boundaries and standards. And then I was doing things that I said I would never do. And so it really was just the same as any other addiction that I've gotten out of with alcohol or cannabis or you know, eating things you're not supposed to eat, like that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And with that being said, it was not an overnight process for sure. But the thing that really like broke the floodgates of my awareness to everything that was happening, I already wanted to get out, but I didn't, it wasn't like a burn the boats, this is the only option kind of thing at that time yet, until my partner, who my boyfriend, the last boyfriend I had while I was still in the industry, we were together for 3 years. This was at the very tail end of it. He confessed to me. I had stopped drinking a few months before that after a 10-year long, like massive addiction. And I took it really seriously and started working out and lost some weight, got really fit. In my own defense, I looked amazing. And he confessed to me on the phone one day that he felt like he was losing sexual attraction for me and sexual like interest in the relationship because I had become too skinny, like quote unquote too skinny, and his preferences, I guess. So I took it on the chin at first, and then I just like had this massive break, and I just was sobbing and crying, and I didn't really know it why at first, like why it impacted me so much, because consciously I was trying to be like toxic positivity kind of thing of like, well, that was brave of you to tell me, and just like really like sugarcoating everything. And then it just hit me, and it stopped. It couldn't stop hitting me. It was this massive flood of just memories from my childhood, of comments from my dad, comments from people about my body, comments from men throughout over the years of being in the industry, of just my body in general. And it was like this massive, painful light bulb where I realized that my entire self-worth was enmeshed and wrapped up in my sexuality and my body image.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't exist without those things. So for him to tell me that he was no longer interested in me sexually, it was like he might as well have said, "You're worthless and I don't value you in any way." Like
Wow.
that's how it impacted me. And so that was my first massive breakthrough of like, I need to do something, and I need to take this into my own hands of like starting an actual healing process, because it's not about making a career change. That's going to be the byproduct of me changing myself from the inside out. And then that was kind of what started me on that journey. That was a lot.
It
It's a
was.
lot. I think it just goes to show, I think every woman can relate to some level about enjoying or just accepting the compliments from physical appearance differently than internally. I mean, even for some women, they may like themselves internally, but they know externally they're not happy with something, or whatever that may be. And to just seek that validation consistently and then make a living out of that validation. Like that was your career, like
Right.
that validation, that approval. And then for all of that to just for him to just say what he said to you, just kind of slapped you in the face of like, this is, almost like you're a failure in
Mhm.
this way of the one person, if you're in a monogamous relationship that you want that approval from, is now not giving that to you. And I mean, I'm sure there's a slew of questions. How many people actually meant what they said to you, and how many people believed that you were actually beautiful, or what were you to them? And um, that process of undoing the career validation that you needed, that is really what built you up, and it just kind of crumbled your foundation of who you were, and you had to rediscover that. I'm sure that was a long process.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. It was like the first time truly, like on a mind, body, soul, every level, that I felt the objectification that I had been experiencing for the last 8 years at
Hmm.
that point. It was like just like tsunami. I felt all of it for the very first time.
Did you feel like you were almost numb to it, or were you just so validating what, like justifying what you were doing, that it didn't really matter, or were you
Both.
just numb? Both.
Yeah, both. Definitely the numbness with the drinking and the weed and all that kind of stuff, and then the justification consciously of like, if I go to Vegas for the weekend and some guy wants to give me a few $1,000s just to walk around on his arm, and then I just have sex with him and it's no big deal. And like, the rest of the time we're just having fun and he's paying for this and paying for that. Like I was dressing it up constantly in my mind as something that was like a fun experience when it was
Sure.
never, ever something that I would have done for free,
Yeah.
And so how fun was it, And so
Mhm.
all of those things I started to wake up to a little bit after that point, and then wake up to it a lot of it after that. And then a real sense of commitment finally showed up for me to do whatever I needed to do to get out of the industry, because up until that point I would try things. I even had like a permanent makeup business for like 6 months, like tattooing people's makeup.
Mhm.
Crazy that anybody ever let me tattoo their face. That was wild. Can't believe I did that. But uh it was just never something that I was ever fully investing in. You know, I didn't care if it really worked because I knew I had this thing to fall back on. And it was finally a turning point of like, I don't want this to ever be a thing I fall back on. And so that was a massive shift.
Yeah. It's interesting that you talked about you kind of always had this mental dissonance about it from the very first occasion. And I wonder, um, is that common in the industry among coworkers, other women and men that you worked with? There are so many reasons that people go into the sex industry. Sometimes it's desperation, sometimes it's empowerment, sometimes it's masked as another thing. So, from your experience, was that mental dissonance and that kind of dichotomy of like, I'm proud of myself and empowered by doing this, but also that I can't remember the word you used, but this disapproval from yourself and from other people. Can you talk a little bit about how other people experience that and how you would? I would imagine there'd be some sort of conversation about it with your coworkers and with your friends at that time.
Yeah. So, friends in a strip club is a very strong word. Because it's a sales position, you know, it's a sales job. It's like your buddies at the car lot that you work with, only you're not selling cars, you're selling yourself. And so it's like you are the product, and every single person that you're working with is your competitor, and they are the product as well. And so it's like it's a really toxic and negative situation, just in all of that being true. Like it's just really negative. But the way that it causes people to show up because of those things and triggers different insecurities. And then like, so I was a really, really profitable stripper. I really was. I don't have any tattoos, I don't have fake boobs. Like those were things that in the place that I was at least were like the few and far between. And I came from a sales background, like an actual sales background. And so I would go out and sit down with every single customer and sell them, you know, and other girls would pop their head out of the dressing room and be like, that guy's still here, and then sit back down and then complain about why they weren't making any money. And so I became a very hot topic for a lot of the women that I worked with. And it was a massive jealousy type of thing. And that started impacting me too, because it was like I was there thinking I was winning, but then I was winning at the expense of all of this crazy judgment and like lies being told. I would leave for a week and then come back, and my customers would be like, "Oh, we heard you got pregnant. Oh, we heard you don't work here anymore. Oh, we heard you have chlamydia," like crazy things. And it was just a really, really toxic environment. So um, back on track to answer your question. So this is like totally, I take 100% claim that like this is my stance on it. And you know, there's space for somebody else to disagree with this, but from my lived experience and how much I did justify it as empowerment at the time, and then how much that completely crumbled once I woke up to the reality of things, I believe that every single angle of like painting the sex industry as women's empowerment is massively conditioned patriarchal stuff in hiding. You know, like you drive down the street and you see billboards of women in their underwear everywhere. It doesn't matter where you're at in the country. You see women selling alcohol, women selling lingerie, jewelry, perfume. They're half naked every single time. And so it paints this image, and then the media, like everything, paints this image in girls growing up to be women, that if you're the one that is wanting, like that somebody wants to buy in one way or another, that somebody wants to choose because of those attributes, you're the one that's winning. You know, so on like so many unconscious, like subtle ways, I believe we're conditioned as women to grow up objectifying ourselves with like some like internalized misogyny, internalized patriarchal stuff that we don't even know about until we see it, you know, and it's like, oh shit, I need to like disentangle that. And so yeah, there were some women that were there. I was definitely on that front of like, I'm choosing to be here. I'm so empowered. Like, look at me go on stage. And it was not my truth in the long run, but that was how I was sustaining it. And then I would say maybe 25% of the women were kind of on that page. And then the rest were really coming from more of the desperation thing of like, I'm having another baby. Like I can't work at my old job anymore. That like I have to do this. My husband is like abusive, like all kinds of really poor situations, poor
Mhm.
circumstances where they they were there because they truly believed. Well, let me be clear. They consciously believed that they had no other choice, because I believed that I had every option in the world and this is the one I was choosing. But when it
Mhm.
came down to my actual healing process starting, like that wasn't true at all. I did believe unconsciously though that I didn't have another option. And
Mhm.
so yeah, it's a trap. It's a trap.
Have you ever done any sort of outreach to young girls to talk about this? Like, I don't know that a school would necessarily hire
Right.
someone with your title just because that probably scares them. But have
Yeah.
you ever been able to do anything to talk to girls who might have been in a similar situation as you when you were 16, saying, I just need a quick, cash fill for one specific thing, just to
Mhm.
encourage them to go the other direction?
Yeah, so I haven't done anything that like specific,
Hmm.
but there have been a few things over the years, and then now I feel so. A couple things I want to say on that. My very first paid experience as a coach was actually a speaking gig at a charter school for 68th graders, and
Wow.
so it was a really really cool experience. But it wasn't just for girls; it was for girls and boys, and it wasn't. It was like a life coaching kind of a thing. And so I did a workshop with them monthly for 5 months. And it was like one was on empathy, one was on like friendship and social media, and like just bringing awareness to like connection and things for the healthy version of it. And so that kind of opened my eyes to like, oh shit, things are even worse than when I was that old.
Mm,
Like there's a lot going on
Mhm.
there's just such an overload of access that they have to everything. Like the first time I ever saw something pornographic, I might have been in 6th grade or 7th grade.
mhm.
And I bet that is so much younger now, as an average. And so it's just like the insidious influences, like it blew my mind, to see the things that they were saying and reacting, and it was an interesting experience. And then when I started my coaching private practice, I was working with men divorced over 40 who realized they didn't have time on their side anymore. They wanted to actually do things right in the relationships, and
Mhm.
that was my first like client, because that was who I understood the most deeply, because I was on the other side of it before that for years. I was the reason. I wasn't I That's wrong words. I wasn't the reason that they were having failed relationships, but because of their failed relationships, that's
Hmm.
the reason that they were finding me. And so then I continued to find men in that category that were in failed relationships, but from a place of actually helping them and not being the crutch and the thing that continued it. So I had a unique understanding of why they were suffering the ways that they were. And now 4 years later, I've done a lot of different education, a lot of different myself and just my business. The two are very intertwined, have grown in a lot of ways. And something I had a massive realization about very recently, like in the last month, is that one, I'm feeling so called to women's work specifically, like radical women's work, like potentially birth work, outside the medical system, and just deep healing for women. But I also had a realization that came with all of that desire, that part of the reason why I've never done that is more of my own internalized patriarchal conditioning, that like I need to have men as an option. I need to have access. Like I need to be available for men on some level, because
Mhm.
if I'm not, like my business might fail. If
Mhm.
I'm not going to be taken seriously. Those kinds of thoughts. Like I finally had awareness about those things for the first time very recently. So now, with all that being said, I do have a desire, and it has crossed my mind to. Um, I'm looking into like a nonprofit startup type of a situation to start investing time and effort into something like that that's oriented for girls like under 18, because yeah, the world is only getting more,
Horrifying.
right. Yeah, so I think that the more they are connected to their bodies, truly, the more they know about their bodies, and the more they are empowered to trust their bodies, then they become immune and really protected from the inside out to all of that conditioning. Because like for me, like I said, the first experience, on one hand I thought it was great, and on the bigger hand I was like dying inside. I had no awareness or ability to listen to that. I didn't know what my body was telling me. I knew it wasn't good, but I didn't know anything
Right.
other than that. So that's really a focus that I want to start moving into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm like, I can't even imagine what that industry is really like because it's not something that I'm familiar with. And it's just a hard concept to grasp. And my heart goes out to any women that feels like they don't have another choice or that is their place, that they belong, just because women have so much more worth in them. And, they do deserve to be treated well and to be, um, loved properly and not taken advantage of or, anything like that. But I'm sure when you're in that and in that, community in a way, it just feels normal. You're associating and talking with people that are doing the same thing as you. So you feel like you have this bond, even though there's that little competition that you were talking about, and seeing the actual external effects of it. You can, physically see pleasure, or you can physically hear someone say compliments, or you can tangibly hold money, but you can't see inside. You're just crumbling apart and your heart is just shattered in a million pieces because you're giving yourself up in these most intimate ways, um, for a business and for the sake of somebody else's gain. It's really not for you. But, talk about the transition coming out of it, because I know just from what I do know about it, it's a very high dollar industry, so you can make a lot of money in it,
Mhm.
which is partially, I'm sure, why it's enticing for some people, especially when they feel like their back's against the wall. So coming out of that, so was it just, like a cold turkey kind of thing where you just stopped doing it one day? And, talk about like the financial transition, because going into coaching and building, and especially going into like nonprofit work or something else, I'm sure just your life, um, everyday life changed based on
Mhm.
what you could afford and not afford, and that can mess with you too. Like you can speak on this too. Like, did you feel like you had, maybe I should just go back and get a little bit more money and come back, and, then I'll be good, I'll be safe again and can pay my rent and all of that. So,
Mhm.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so constantly there was a lot of that, and that's like where I can really relate it to like an addiction, like it
Okay,
was
yeah, sure,
it
makes sense.
was something that was really hard to let go of because
Right.
it was a dependency,
Mhm.
and so it wasn't like I lost my waitressing job at Applebee's, I'm going to go apply at Chili's. It
Right.
was like there was nothing that translated, because it is a standalone kind of thing where like I mean, not really, because you're sacrificing your whole entire self. So the money is justified on some level, but like what you're doing and the amount of money you're making and the amount of time it takes you and all of those things are just so out of whack compared to any other industry that you could possibly step into.
Right.
And so with my sales and entrepreneur stuff, like background before the industry, um, at like 16, 17, 18. So when I was doing this stuff at 17, it was like only a handful of times. It wasn't like my career. I was
Right.
doing other things. And then I left this very hard knock sales job, like door knocking type of stuff, being rejected all day long, and
Mm.
then started selling my body to men who were going to buy my body. And so it was like taking candy from a baby kind of a thing. And it was
Mm.
like so easy. And then that
Mm.
easiness started to become part of the crutch. And I literally lost my entire sense of work ethic over that chunk of years.
Mm.
Lost it. It disappeared. And so that was one piece of having to actually like relearn and remember what it feels like to work,
Mm.
for any number of hours on a regular schedule, and um, actually have to invest that time and effort and energy to get a result back and not the instant gratification that was available in that industry.
Right.
And then the other piece is like really the disentangling of my how I was able to value myself when I was selling a part of my body versus valuing myself when I was selling something that came from my mind or something that was coming from my soul. Like a completely different value system had to be
Right.
created, and that was really 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 hard.
Mm.
And like I had the awareness that like this doesn't make sense. But the inside work of like really recalibrating myself, that took a long time. And there were definitely a number of times I went back, but I started justifying it in a different way of like, okay, I'm going to stop having sex. Like I'm going to stop having like there's no penetration allowed, like nothing.
Mhm.
And so then I would like go on dates with guys and I would do like, it started to become more and more mild, I guess you could say, compared to how I was living my life. And then eventually, as I was setting these boundaries with myself, like slowly but surely, I started to become more and more like repulsed by the experiences again and again and again. Like it was like every time I saw a certain guy or every time I saw a guy in general, I was more like hateful. I
Mhm.
was more like, oh, I don't want to be here. Like, oh, I hate you so much. Like, oh, when is the hour over? Kind of a thoughts in my mind. And then that finally started to tip the scale of like, the pain of leaving and the discomfort and the uncertainty and all of those things is finally outweighing the pain of staying,
Sure.
which I had just been enduring for so long. And so
Mhm.
that was a big piece. And yeah, allowing myself to charge for what I do now was a very hard thing to tackle. And then it, once I did it once, I was like, wow, I can do this. And then it started to open up.
Sure.
We all need a little bit of that validation with imposter syndrome, saying, "What is this actually what I'm
Yes.
capable of doing?" Okay, yes, great.
Right.
This is a legitimate service that I'm providing to people so they can better themselves. Yeah.
Yes.
So, can we jump a little bit into your mental and emotional healing journey? Because I can't imagine, and maybe I'm wrong, there might be like a transition support group for people leaving the sex industry, but I just can't, I've never heard of one. So I'm not sure what type of community there is for people who have kind of distanced themselves. So did you seek therapy? Was it personal independent work? Walk us through that.
Yeah. So a lot of it was personal, of like me doing things on my own, um, with stopping drinking,
Hmm.
building like a fitness like into my lifestyle to where that the fitness side was a perk, a benefit, but it was about the mental reconditioning, of like, I am worth what I'm doing right now. I'm worth this hour a day. And like starting to rebuild the mindset around how I was treating myself and spending time, changing my diet, like all of these more tangible things to start to like rewire my thought process around what I was worth. That was a big piece of it. And then I started investing in just a lot of different things. I did a number of different business coaching programs over the first couple of years of this, and those were, I can see now in hindsight that like it was coming from a place of me wanting to like essentially wanting the answers, wanting someone to give me the keys, kind of still wanting someone else to save me,
Mm.
and like tell me how to do this, tell me how to make money in a way that is different than what I've done. And through those processes, I was made aware that like, oh, this is what I'm doing. I'm seeking somebody else to solve these problems for me, but it's an inside thing that needs to be done. So then right alongside the time when the ex-boyfriend had said this crazy stuff and I like had a meltdown and opened the door to change, I also was going through what I would consider like my own spiritual awakening. Like it was a massive loss in my life. And it so for context, my parents split when I was 5 years old. I was raised by my dad after that point on till like late teens. And my mom was gone out of the picture for the most part. And so there was a massive like abandonment wound,
Mm.
especially around the feminine, which is why I, was probably so tolerant to the environment of women just hating each other in the
Mm.
strip club kind of thing. There's no sense of community at all, and if there is, it's false and catty and weird. So it's a massive sisterhood wound type of thing just in the whole industry. So that was at 5 years old. I did not cry about my mom and the loss of the whole everything, not even one time, until I was 21 years old. And so like that, for context of like just how disconnected I was from my own emotions, from my own,
Mm.
like from everything,
Mhm.
so numb, so dissociated, so like hardened. And so I had this massive thing that like whether I liked it or not, it was like shattering me. And then that, I think, I see it now as it was all on purpose. It opened me up in a way that allowed everything else to start happening. I was crying all the time for no reason. Like there was plenty of reason, I'm sure, in the background, but like consciously, I'm like, why am I crying? Like, like a stereotypical like pregnant lady. Like, I don't know, I'm just like it was like that all the time, and I started just feeling more spiritually connected, like more interested in nature, more interested in different books. I started meditating. Um, I started seeing a psychic, like those types of things. And I did a lot of spiritual work on myself during that time as well. The meditation was a big thing. A lot of spiritual, like different types of spiritual healers that I worked with. I did something kind of cool called an inner child soul retrieval, where it's like this very hard to explain like shamanic experience where like the fragmented parts of my childhood were like energetically retrieved and put back together, and that was a really cool experience. And then coaching, and with the tantra that I teach now, um, so the modality that I teach is authentic tantra, and it's a trauma informed holistic healing modality rooted in a lineage based version of Tibetan tantra. And so to become like certified or licensed, it's an actual governmentally recognized thing, which is cool. So to
Yeah.
become licensed in that, I had to go through a 2.5 year long training of this, like school basically. And the first year of it is dedicated to me learning it and me healing myself through it. And so that was a big piece of my healing as well. Um, there's really 4 components to it: connection, like with self and others, which was just barely starting to happen for me on a true level, meditation, pleasure, and um, movement. And so allowing myself to use all of those different things and really embracing my own healing process was a big catalyst. A lot of different retreats and healing programs and coaching and like everything I could get my hands on, I was doing
Mhm.
basically.
So really, really active. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
a lot of people who think that they can just decide to be better and then not actively do anything. Even if they're
Right.
going to counseling, if the only time you're going to counseling is that hour and then it leaves your brain, yes, some change can happen, but you are aggressively attacking your mental
Yeah.
health. And so that's such an interesting way to put it, where it's not just one thing that I'm doing, you did all of the things. And they
Yeah.
all really seemed to have kind of multimodally helped you. Is that the reason
Yeah.
why you have different modalities and different branches that you help people with, because you had so many that helped you?
It is definitely, because when I first started, it was very mental only. I was like, mindset, mindset, mindset. I'm going to just read these affirmations all day long. And I
Mhm.
started to learn through my own like incongruence. After enough time, I would like feel better and be convinced that I was in a new set of beliefs and all this mindset work. And then it would like, I'd turn around and like see a new shadow and be like, what the fuck? Like, I thought that was gone now and it's not. And so I realized how like disintegrated what I was doing was, and there needed to be more like depth to it. And so the mindset, the body, the spirit, like every single piece needed to be involved. And when I really embraced that, like that holistic nature of who we are as humans, and started to tend to myself in a holistic way and not leaving any part out, that was really what allowed me to like raise the baseline and actually heal in a way that like there was no sliding backwards after that.
Hmm. I like that term. You raised the baseline. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a question for you about you said you're a clinical sexologist, which is something that most people, I would say, in the country are probably uncomfortable or would never go to, or you name it. So I'm curious to know, having the background that you have, how has that really painted your view of sex in the way that you can be a benefit to other people? And I'm not saying that you can't, but it's just that I'm sure that has been hard. Again, part of the emotional and soul healing that you've had to go through, of what that looks like from the way that you've experienced it in your career and in those years of being paid, and then next to somebody who is in a monogamous committed marriage or relationship or something like that. Like, what is your process and view of that now?
Yeah, so I love that question. It's radically different, like a complete 180. So at the time in the industry, like it was just sex. period. Like, it was just sex. Oh, it was so fun. And I even had this like weird, totally delusional, like self image kind of arrogance almost of like, I'm sleeping around, but I'm getting paid for it. I'm not just going out to the bars. I'm not just having sex with Joe Blow on Tinder. Like, I'm getting paid for it. And so that was something that I had to kind of work through as well after the fact of like, and I realized and made the connection that women who are sleeping around, which I did before the industry, like throughout high school and stuff, it's all the same motivation at the root. It's a self-worth thing of like seeking the approval outside of yourself, you know, on some level, and being willing to give yourself away in certain ways that may not actually be congruent with what you truly want. And you do it anyways because it's like a hit of dopamine, it's a hit of oxytocin, and then it's like, oh, I wake up and he didn't text me. Damn, that sucks. You know, and like, yeah. So anyways, that was a little sidetrack.
It's okay.
Through my tantra training, so if you've seen any picture ever of like a chakra system, like, you know what I'm talking about, there's like a center of energy in your body, and then the centers are along that. So in this lineage that I practice of Tibetan tantra, the thing in the center that's like our core of energy is called the central channel. And in a female body, there's an offshoot through the cervix, and in a male body, there's an offshoot through the penis. And so, quite literally, when you are in at least heterosexual sex, like penis in vagina sex, you are literally in sexual union. And that's where that term comes from, where it's like your energy body, the eternal part of you, your soul, your spirit, whatever you consider it, is literally plugged into the other person's, and you're exchanging that throughout the whole time, you know? And so with my own process of healing, there was a lot of stuff in the very beginning around womb work and like healing all of the physical trauma and spiritual trauma that I had accumulated, like energetics just stuck in my womb and my genitals, and like clearing and releasing and forgiving, and so much stuff that I had done there. Then learning this modality and all of these different teachings, it has been a true 180 where now I see sex as something that is so sacred, like so sacred. Like, there's not a single part of me in any circumstance that would have sex with somebody now that was not in alignment with me on every single level, that I wasn't in love with, that I wasn't actually available for opening myself. And I see sex as like the last thing to open now, versus in the past it was the thing I was leading with. And so that's why when you have a one night stand or you have sex with someone that you're not really into, or there's conflict undertone of conflict, you have sex with them and then you feel like shit. It's because you're literally exchanging so much energy between each other, and it's incongruent. It doesn't feel good. And then you're anxious, or then you're like, I woke up feeling worse than I did yesterday. It's because you're taking a lot on and giving a lot away that isn't, I personally believe, isn't supposed to be done that way, you know? And so when you're in a monogamous relationship, for example, or not even, but just having sex consciously with people, I think that it can be quite the opposite, where there can be a lot of healing and a lot of profound like connection and spiritual connection to each other and to whatever else you believe in, when you are conscious of like what's happening on the deeper levels and how you can leverage those things to become closer together, to where it really is sexual union, and you're not just having sex because it's like a Friday and you said you would, you know?
Right. Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's kind of like if you equate it to like an AA of an alcoholic, you know, it's like your mindset completely does shift, and you say, you know, I was here, now I'm here, and let me tell you why. And explaining that can be, I'm sure, can be really helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah, totally.
What's one of your favorite things to share with couples when you're, and I know it's a huge, because it depends on context and it depends on the issues they come to you with, but like if there's one thing that so many people are like, whoa, that you're like, this is just baseline simple, why doesn't everybody see
Yeah,
this? You know, is
right.
there one common thing that we all just don't know?
Definitely. And I think this applies to every part of the relationship: communication, friendship, sex, all of it. That personal responsibility will set you free. Like when it comes to sexual satisfaction, for example, nobody is supposed to make you come. Nobody's supposed to make you do anything. Like we are responsible for our own orgasm. We are responsible for our own pleasure, and communicating those things effectively and asking for what we want, asking for what we need. And so that is, the same as like in the kitchen. Maybe she cooks dinner 7 nights a week and she feels like he should cook dinner at least once a week, and just makes sideways snarky comments at him, and like it's never truly communicated, and then she's resentful. Why? Because she isn't being responsible for how she is actually feeling and communicating it effectively. So communication is like a close second, but I see personal responsibility and truly stepping outside of like victim consciousness at every single step. And there's no shame or bad or right or wrong on it, because we all have been conditioned to think that way on some level. That somebody else can make you happy, when that's not true. Somebody else is meant to, in the highest level, in my opinion, of a conscious relationship, be an addition to your life, but not the reason that you're happy or the reason that you're fulfilled. And so when we can really take personal responsibility for our inner emotional experience, no matter what the other person's doing, that's when both people can come together safely, and then really connection can be built, because there's no blame being pointed about whatever's going on, good or bad.
Yeah, that's great.
What would be, I know sex is so tainted in so many ways, whether that's like purity culture and Christianity, or, sleeping around in college, or, the sex industry, whatever. I mean, sex is just so, everybody has such a different view of what it is and what it means and what it should be. What would you say for a lot of people, again, probably wouldn't want to come to a sexologist? Like they're shameful of it, or if there's some kind of issue, they don't want to talk about it. Why would somebody, when would you recommend somebody come to see somebody who's a clinical sexologist?
Yeah, so definitely the clinical side of things, like if there's an actual physical dysfunction of some sort. So for men, like some sort of erectile dysfunction or like premature ejaculation, like those types of things, endurance issues. And then for a woman, oftentimes the dysfunction is like, there's a number of different clinical things, like vaginismus, for example, where like the whole pelvic floor is too contracted all the time to where she can't experience penetration without like massive amounts of pain. So something that's like really truly on the clinical side of dysfunction, but also everything you just said, like the internalized shame around it on either end of the spectrum. A lot of the clients I've worked with have come from like Mormon upbringings, or very strong Catholic households, or something like that, where they're taught like you do nothing until you're married, and there's no education or support about what you even do when you're married. And so like they come into adulthood, my clients at least have come into adulthood of like, this is like a ticking time bomb. Like I'm almost afraid of getting married, because I don't know what to do. I don't know what this is supposed to be like. Like there's just so much lack of education, lack of ability to stay connected to your own body through these experiences, because of our just collective nervous system dysregulation, and stored traumas, whether that's because of the shame you grew up with in your household as a child, or an experience where you were, experienced something that was out of consent, or you had sex with 40 people before you turned 18. Like anywhere on that spectrum, there's something to be healed, I think. And that's, again, just speaking to the holistic approach that I use for everything. So like clinical or otherwise, I see it all as the same.
Do you do like premarital kind of working with these couples that do want to wait, and helping them to have like a better experience in their marriage as well?
I do. Yes, actually. I have a 6 month, like this is my most like intensive coaching thing for couples. It's a 6 month VIP kind of like all in program called Relationship Revolution. And fun fact, just for anyone listening, premarital anything, whether it's with your pastor at church or like me or some other type of professional, premarital intervention decreases the risk of divorce for that couple by 33%. Like that's massive, And so it's like anything that you invest into getting awareness, getting more connected, fixing whatever needs to be fixed before you change the dynamic of your commitment is in your best interest. So just want to say that. But my big program, I just had a couple go through it last year. They were both waiting till marriage, and so they still have not slept together. They're getting married at the end of this year. And I actually was just asked to be a bridesmaid in the
Oh.
wedding. And they weren't like personal friends. It was totally professional. But through the experience, like because of how much changed for both of them and their relationship, like I felt so honored. I was like, wow, this is the coolest thing ever. Because they both feel supported in that choice now. You know,
Sure.
it's not coming from shame. It's coming from like empowerment of like, we want to wait because, and when we're done waiting, when that time is out, like we're so excited about it versus any sort of shame. Like I have to do this because my grandma said I had to. And now like, oh, what's the wedding night going to be like? Like there's no more fear and shame in it. It's completely rewritten. And so, yeah, I do work with couples with that.
Yeah, I think that can be such a fear for people, and even people that have a traumatic sexual background as well, then going into a committed relationship, whether that's a marriage or,
Yeah.
you know, whatever that is. I guess it would be a marriage, but like going from something that's traumatic or something that's purity and going into this season of togetherness, connection, sex can be very scary for a lot of people that don't know what to expect. They don't know what it's going to feel like. They don't know what to do. And, I think that's great, offering something that will help people get to that place, because like you said, you're empowering people to wait. You're empowering people to really love themselves and cherish their own worth before giving that to someone else. So I think that's a great example of how you just turned, what you have done in your past for good, and very clearly just given a path for people that don't know what to do in those
Yeah.
circumstances.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we always ask our guests about a song, or honestly, usually with me it's two or three because I can never pick just one. But something that either speaks to a certain time in your story, or a song that has helped you get through a certain time in your story, or just something that really excites you, and a song that really always makes you feel a certain way. And it's always so random what people come up with, and so I'm really, really curious about your musical taste and things like that, because we know that music can support so much in healing journeys. And so, what would be a song that really will help our listeners get to know Hannah Spanke a little bit better?
Yeah, I like that question. So this song definitely was a big part of my healing journey. It was played so I did this like 90-day virtual like inner child coaching program thing, like complete inner child reparenting and healing and all this stuff. And then this like end of it was a 7-day long retreat where it was like massive in-person work to like conclude everything we had done. And throughout almost every single day, at some point in the day, this song was played throughout one of our like emotional processes during that retreat. And so it hits different for me. Like it was like ingrained and so deeply associated with healing that I'm like, this is it. And so it's called In Dreams by Jai. And then I guess you'd say her last name Jagdish, I think. Like Jagdeesh, I think is how you spell it. So she creates like conscious spiritual music, and it's called In Dreams. And it's just, to me, the message is just really about like reminding you of like your divine perfection, that like you are everything you've always wanted to be, kind of a thing. And I just had that on replay for months, like in my headphones, doing chores, doing whatever, just like again and again and again and again. I have however many hundreds of songs, and it was the only song I would play for like a whole year.
Wow.
And so that one, I really, really love that song. Yeah.
I love that because I don't know who that is, and I get to hear new music. So thank you for introducing me to that. Do you think that it was intentional that it was playing during those, or do you think they just had a playlist that was cycling through?
There was definitely a playlist, but I think it was intentional for sure. And like it has a lot of mantra type of things in it. It says like, you are loved, you are, like a lot of stuff like that. So like during a big emotional release or emotional process, like hearing that in the background is supportive, I would say. So I think it was intentional, and it, what was I going to say? I don't know. I just forgot. But yeah, it was a very important song, I would say, for me.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I think that that's really, when you talked about the inner child fragmentation work, is that the same 90-day? That's a
No,
lot.
that was different.
Oh my gosh.
The 90 days was, yeah, there were so many different things I was doing all at once. The 90 days was more of like I mean, it was definitely, there was a spiritual component to it because like it was deeper than mindset work, but it was unconscious reprogramming basically. And then the soul fragmentation thing was like a truly spiritual shamanic, like some lady like shaking a drum and the like kind of crazy stuff. So yeah. Different but supportive of each other.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that your story is pretty incredible, and not many people can come out and have repaired as much as you have repaired and worked as hard as you have worked to get to the place where you are. And so I would say, not from the patriarchal type side of things, that you are an inspiration to women and an empowerment to women. And we are really grateful for you sharing with us your story and just sharing your experiences. And then just really leading people into a place of health for the whole body. And I think that's really, really important. So thank you for all the work that you do. And we're really just grateful to see. I mean, for me, it's just so nice to see somebody that's been in that situation and in that line of work now really turning it for good and showing people how we are, as women, we are meant to be cherished and loved and to love ourselves as well. And that's really important, that we are not an object. We're not something that can just be tossed around and used. So thank you so much for your encouragement today. We're really grateful.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This has been awesome.